I have been getting some messages and thoughts that a discussion about the darker aspects of the chakras would be helpful for people. And so I'm going to continue talking about the darker aspects of each chakra. And so let's talk about the darker aspects of the second chakra. I will say that some people, including myself, consider the first and second chakra to not have much differentiation. For example, I conceptualize the first and second chakra is basically an energy ball in our sacrum, and that can release through the genitals, essentially, where we consider the first chakra. But in keeping in line with our seven chakra map, let's discuss what the darker aspects of the second chakra are, even knowing that there will be a bit of overlap with some of the darker aspects of the first chakra as well. So in the first chakra, the darker aspects are going to be all about us feeling completely separated from everyone and everything. It's sort of like we are in a complete void. And so people in that intense amount of suffering have not differentiated themselves from others. And so they just lash out in pain with pretty much everyone. With the second chakra, we have developed enough consciousness to differentiate ourselves. And what that basically means is that we have evolved to the point where we can consider ourselves to be part of a group. And so the first aspect of the darkest aspects of the second chakra I will talk about are the kind of us versus them, I versus the other sort of thinking that comes from this chakra, in which we have enough consciousness to sort of differentiate, but we do not have enough consciousness to sort of move out of the sort of tribal consciousness or black and white type of thinking that predominates in the first and second chakra. So the type of thinking that is part of this chakra is very much I versus another, or myself and others in my group versus another group. And so I suppose the very darkest aspect of this chakra are things like war. But really, if we consider it on a personal level, there will be a conceptualization of self is good and other is bad. And so in a collective, that will be myself is good and others in that other group are bad. To explain this, I can talk a little bit about the shadow. If you are interested in this topic, I very much suggest my Working with the Shadow book, which explains everything and more that you could ever want to know about personal and collective shadows. But in the second chakra, we are not going to typically have nuanced thinking. We are going to think that we are Batman and everybody else is the Joker, so to speak. I am good, you are bad, that sort of stuff. And it is stark black and white type of thinking. And what we are really doing here is pushing the aspects of ourselves that we are not conscious of, we are ignorant of, that we hate within ourselves onto a convenient other. So onto another person, onto another group. And so while we remain sort of locked into the first and second chakra, our lives will be sort of filled with negativity, self-loathing, self-hatred. And we rightfully don't want to see that sort of stuff within ourselves. We don't want to sit with it because it's an immense amount of suffering. And so what do? We find a convenient other to sort of shove our shadow material on. And there are so many convenient places that we can do this to. Interpersonally, that we might do this to somebody that we know. But it's also very convenient to do it to politicians, to hate groups, to serial killers, to all of these types of people that rightfully may deserve some sort of, thought or emotion or something like that. But we live in such a culture now in like, where you could look at any gossip column and see the sort of parasocial relationships that we've created, underneath any celebrity is going to be our own unowned misogyny, our own unowned self-hatred, self-loathing, all of that sort of stuff that we just simply have found a convenient resource to attempt to push it away and push it out of ourselves and find an object for it to land on. You will find people do this with their shadows that are more like qualities as well. For example, somebody who goes to the gym may be very proud of their progress, but somebody who is continually talking about how other people are weak or lazy, that is a shadow of their own stuff that they could stand to reconcile. And so we do this in groups as well. We are a part of a group, and so we consider our group to be good or the best and the other opposing group to be terrible, horrible, evil, that sort of thing. And so obviously this can happen in politics and that sort of stuff, but it can also happen like just in other ways as well. I will give a good example because it's kind of a ludicrous one. As many of you may have known, I was a craniosacral therapist for many years. And I was a part of a group that was discussing Upledger's version of craniosacral therapy. There are three, I would say, best known versions of craniosacral therapy. Upledger therapy is perhaps the best known one or the best marketed one. Um, I will also say that I was trained in one of the other schools, which is known as biodynamic as well. And so when I was part of this group, the one discussing upledger therapy, they started talking about how, they're so much better than biodynamic craniosacral and just all this sort of stuff. And I took a moment and took a step back, not only because I was trained in it, but also because my thought at the time was how silly it was, first of all, but also when you take a step back, how many people actually know what craniosacral therapy is? And of that very small percentage of the population, how many would know that there are different schools in it? How many would care? And if you're truly trained in it, the difference is there are some, but they are kind of marginal. I am sharing this story not to pick on craniosacral therapy because I have been a part of so many different groups over the years where this has played out. It can either be in a supposedly healthy way, like this is the best modality, it can help absolutely everything, we are the greatest. And if you were to take a step back from that tribalism, you might think to yourself, for example, acupuncture is very helpful for a lot of things. It may not be helpful for certain people or certain types of people. For example, I've gone through periods of my life where I've been too sensitive, or in acupuncture terms, too sort of depleted to accept acupuncture or have it be the best therapy for me at the time. But there is this sort of tribalism that we find across groups, across lifestyles, across ways of being, in which we are the ones that know the truth. We are the ones that know the mysteries of the world. We are the ones that are right, and everybody else is terrible or horrible or not as great as us, or will not find, the golden ticket, so to speak. And so you will find this in pretty much anyone that is at this level, where you will find that within yourself or within another person, they continually are pointing out disowned aspects of themselves or aspects of themselves in terms of a group that they hate. For example, somebody that truly hates, let's say, I hear people hate and rag on New Agers all the time. Somebody for whom that is a huge aspect of their personality likely is kind of stuck in ignorance. And by that, I mean that all of us, if we trace the lineage of the New Age in the Western world, will have been affected by it. And so, what you will see by people who kind of have this sort of self-hatred, this self-loathing that they push outwards, is that a big part of their personality will be about this shadow. Everything will be about the physically fit person pointing out the weakness of others and how great they are. And so if that person were to come up to the third chakra, they would have the awareness or nuance or education to be like, you know what? Let me look at the weaker aspects of myself or that are not as strong. How can I help people who are struggling with that quality that I notice in myself? How can I come to terms with the fact that maybe someday I will be, weak and need some help? How can I educate myself to recognize that if I am saying, I hate New Agers and that is my personality, how can I ensure then that I am not then speaking a bunch of New Age or New Thought or, kind of concepts based in Theosophy? Because chances are that person that is pointing that out and everybody else and how horrible they are, their next thought is going to come directly from, that sort of lineage, because we all have been impacted about regarding it. So I will also point out conspiracy theories here, and this is probably, I will say, on the top 10 list of stuff that I talk about that people will not like me for. But I think it's wonderful when people consider the world around them, um, as long as they are not going into the thought of, I am scientism and, everything that is magical is stupid. Um, that sort of us versus them variety. I will say that one of the most difficult parts of being a spiritual worker in the modern world, and I have been one for about 20 years, is that there needs to be an openness to both the magical and the practical at the same time. A good example of this, and again, this might be hard for some people to fathom, but we are so spiritually orphaned, so spiritually disconnected, that a lot of people will believe that whatever is in the spiritual world is after them. That is a very first, second chakra thought. And it really has to do with their own disowned stuff. Who better to project on into the actual other, our own shadows of fear, our own shadows of hatred, our own shadows of our childhood unreconciled stuff than the spirit realms. And how to add a healthy dose of religion on top of that. And it certainly leads to a bunch of people that believe, in the propaganda of horror movies that a bunch of dead-eyed nuns are after them and that sort of stuff. And so in my line of work, it is very possible that spiritual elements are impacting somebody's life But the real problem is, and I talk about this in some of my shamanic workbooks, is that if 100 people come to me and 97 of them who believe that spirits are after them or attached to them actually has to do with personal wounding or shadow work or something they need to reconcile within, that leaves 3 people who authentically need some sort of spiritual assistance from somebody who can see and notice that sort of stuff and be able to heal it. So I'm just mentioning that because it is like kind of the furthest projections of our own self-hatred, our own fear, our own stuff that we tend to do is to project onto other people, onto groups, and onto the other. But back to conspiracy theories. I think it is wonderful for people to consider the world around them. We live in a world where so much is crafted for us, where so much is sort of fed to us, where we have so much propaganda coming our way in order for us to think in a particular way. But somebody who is really wounded and stuck in the second chakra of consciousness, they are coming from a wound of isolation, an outlier wound. And like I talked about with the second chakra video, a wound of authority. And so in order for somebody to perpetuate that childhood wound where they were not seen or accepted by their parents, and so they feel unlovable, unlikable, like an outsider, an outlier, what are they going to do to continue to loop through that, to continue to live out that energy? Well, they're going to attach themselves to odd theories, to theories and thoughts and communities that will let them live out being an outlier. And so I will say that there are many outliers in the world, many people who think differently, who think brilliantly, but there are a lot of people who experience this wound of being an outlier because they were not accepted and loved unconditionally by their parents, accepted by their family, and so they are perpetuating that wound by believing all of these conspiracy theories, which are essentially a way for them to say, screw you to authority. I am not accepting you authority because um, there is a direct translation between authority as parent and authority as government or doctor or anybody else that is in that position of authority. And so basically one of the darkest aspects of the second chakra is living out our mommy daddy issues and placing them onto the world and onto organizations that represent authority. And so if we heal those wounds and we still believe some odd stuff, wonderful. It likely, if we thought through it and, find ourselves in a place of thinking a bit differently, like obviously wonderful, but it's helpful to consider that wound because it will really color people's experiences of reality. It will place them in a part where they need to be an outlier, where they need to be fighting against authority because they didn't have the best experience with their parents. The last thing that I will talk about is that when we're in the first and second chakra, we are still in a stage of development where we're essentially a toddler. And so the last one I'm going to talk about is that people are not necessarily in that first chakra stage where they're just like attempting to suck people dry, but they are in a stage where they are looking for hand-holding and support and for people to take as much responsibility, to do as much adulting, as the term goes, as possible for them. On some level, they recognize that their consciousness is still in a toddlerhood state. And so there is a sincere desire for others to do the work for them, to take responsibility for them, to think for them, to So to do for them, to do as much possible as they can get out of others. There will be kind of a light of some type of reciprocity, but in the second chakra, it may be kind of minimal, but the person who is stuck in this sort of consciousness, the darkest aspects of this type of consciousness will still be in a stage of consciousness where they are hoping that others take responsibility for themselves, for them, because they have limited capacity to take responsibility for themselves emotionally or physically. Um, this type of person cannot yet think of their own thoughts. That requires, a higher amount of consciousness, and so they tend to go along with propaganda, with groupthink, with whatever club or group, social, cultural, religious, societal, news, whatever sort of groups that they align their identity with, they will think the thoughts that those groups, that those parties, that culture would like for them to think, without any consideration of, is this working for me? Is this something that I believe? Or maybe do I believe a bit differently? All of those thoughts, when we get up to this third center, can be things that we start to consider, do I truly believe this, or is this just something that I grew up with, something that society or the news or, the group that I'm part of told me to think. All right, so I hope that you are enjoying the chakra series, and there's a whole playlist that shows all of the chakra videos if you have missed some of them.